So welcome everyone to our Healing for Wellbeing series from the New Beginning Center. We are really just delighted and honored and pleased. I'm excited to have all of you here, the ones I get to see on screen and the rest of you who've signed on. I'm Sean Baker. I'm the co-owner and executive director and your host. And so before we get started today, I'm just going to go over a few tips of how we can communicate with each other during the webinar. First, you can move our talking heads anywhere on your screen for your optimal viewing. Please use the raise your hand feature if you need to let us know that there's some need of immediate attention, like you can't see us, you can't hear us, something to that effect. And then please use the Q&A for your questions. We really appreciate all of the questions that came forward beforehand, and we will be taking questions as we go throughout today's conversation. I'll either be gathering them and waiting to the end, or if it seems pertinent, I will kind of insert them as we go along. And then please use the chat feature to let us know your feedback about the webinar or to share any resources that might be helpful to us. And then we may also be using the chat feature to kind of get your input at particular times during the webinar. I'll leave that up to our wonderful presenters. We will be recording today's webinar, and we'll send you a thank you for attending and a link to the recording when it's ready, so you can go back and have another look at it and or share it with others. I'm just really pleased with the positive response we've received from these webinars during this pandemic and the global upheaval that it sort of has catalyzed. We really see this as an opportunity to heal the pain of trauma that's resulted from the violence, prejudice, and white privilege that really has been woven through the air that we all breathe and into the fabric of our connected souls. And so we're really honored to come together as a community, a local community, and present, well, local and national community, and present this two-part series called All of Us Together, because it really will take that. We commit to do what we can to extinguish systemic racism and oppression, because doing so is mental health care, and that's the business that we're in. I expect and hope that this will really be a conversation and a dialogue, because as I've done trainings for working with trans patients and LGBT issues, I've experienced, that it takes the telling of one story to another to individually and collectively make change and soften our hearts and minds. So in doing so, I wanted to make the introductions really personal. I've had the privilege, and I'm so grateful for my friendship with Emem, working with her at the Santa Paula Pride Clinic. I got to see how her passion, her commitment, and her compassion for every human life was heart forward, and so clearly has demonstrated leadership by example. So I'm just so blessed to know you, Emem, and I'll let you take the introductions from here.
Thank you so much, Sean. And it indeed is a pleasure and an honor to be asked to do such a presentation, such a profound webinar. And I think what's important, and Sean and I discussed this initially when, it was an idea. And from the moment he asked me to do this, my thought was, oh, absolutely, because as he stated, I was one of three initially in the inception of our Pride Clinic, the only clinic at that time in Ventura County that opened its family medicine practice to LGBTQIA individuals. And so Sean came on along with his wife as therapists, and just since then, it's just been, it is interesting to learn so much from, because I come from the medical background where I'm always focusing on just, treating the patient from a medical perspective, but also understanding that mental health is so critical in what we do as primary care providers. And so just having someone there to always, bounce ideas on was amazing. And so, again, I appreciate you, having us today. I will introduce Miss Miaya Wright. Miaya Wright is, I'll give you her formal introduction and then of course close it with how, I know Miaya. Miaya received her master's in Arts and Communication Disorders at the University of Houston in 2006, also my alma mater, go Cougs. She is a licensed speech language pathologist who specializes in pediatrics and has worked over 14 years in a variety of settings, including early childhood intervention, private practice, and local public school districts. Currently, Maya is the lead speech language pathologist at an outpatient pediatric rehabilitation clinic where she works with children and developmental delays, speech language disorders, and feeding disorders, autism, and other disabilities. But most importantly, I've known Maya since I was 14 years old or so. So it's been, you know, well over decades. And one thing I have to say that I love about her is her love of humanity, her service, her willingness to always challenge herself to think differently. And so really, she's just not a friend to me. She really is a sister. So go ahead, Miss Meyer.
That was awesome. Thank you. All right. Emem is a licensed physician assistant and is also a certified health coach. She's practiced in the underserved primary care clinic in Ventura County for the past 13 years, in which she provides comprehensive care. When not working in the clinic, Emem loves learning and exploring new passions such as forming and building her company, Emem Powered Health and Wellness, in which she continues to engage, equip, and empower others. And yes, I've known Emem a long time, like she said. I had to work hard to get to know her. I guess I looked suspicious. I had to earn my friendship. And we eventually went to college together. We weren't roommates. That's probably why we're still friends. And I do feel like I am truly thankful and blessed to be able to still call her friend. So are we ready to begin?
I think so.
Okay. To everyone out there, I'm going to screen share our PowerPoint presentation. That way you have something to look at while we discuss talking points. Okay, so let's get started. Combating racism is a difficult topic that our country has been dealing with, white supremacy, since its inception. So while overall we'll have, this is a difficult conversation to have and possibly creates tension. But preparing in this talk with Emem, I revisited Dr. King's letter from the Birmingham jail. So I'll be, throughout this discussion, I'll be using excerpts from it because unfortunately I find it still applicable today and extremely valuable and a beautifully written letter. So the letter, if anyone isn't familiar with it, it was his response to a group of white clergymen in Birmingham because they believed his participation in nonviolent demonstrations to be an extremist. So he was responding to their views. So social injustices in particular and racism seems to create discomfort and tension. But the reality is this tension has always been present for Black Americans. It's our way of life and we just guide through it. But now seems like a time more than ever that we can address and confront this tension head on with all possible with grace and love in order to create change with others. So with that, here's an excerpt from the letter. Dr. King wrote, "My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I'm not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth." So our goal today is hopefully extend and to continue to grow.
Wonderful. And I will just add to that. And I believe after I add to that, Sean also just had some things to say about, you know, a conversation such as this. Yes, it is definitely difficult. We recognize that it will incite and invoke feelings that may make you uncomfortable. But what I always try to draw back to is this idea that from that discomfort, we know that change can happen. And so we want to make certain that you recognize that we recognize the tension that is going to be there. But it's important to have that. We also want you to, in the event that you've, and this is the beauty of this being recorded, that you can always come back to this. And so if there is a moment in time, and also please use the chat line, because that's what it's there for, to ask questions. If something doesn't seem quite clear, please, feel free to ask the question. We'll try to get back to this within this hour we have. And if we don't have the time, obviously, we'll try to answer the questions at a later time. But we just want to, let you know that we recognize that there is going to be discomfort within this webinar.
Yeah, and from a mental health perspective, to me, honoring that as a wonderful step into awareness, because that's the first step, as Emem said, towards change, to really be compassionate with yourself and your nervous system. Breathe, pause, make space for yourself and your feelings. As we do that on an individual basis, that is really what's needed in our larger society. So to really honor whatever's coming up for you, even if you don't understand it or why it's happening, and then ask for support. You can ask us for support. You can send us a private message. You can certainly pause this and come back to it later and talk to a beloved friend. But this truly is, to me, on a small level, we're trying to create a space for what really is needed on a larger level that includes all of us in this together, lending a hand where we have that resilience and asking for help when we lose our resilience.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sean. So let's get right into the topics. And so we have several topics that we're going to discuss. And I do want to make it clear that really myself and Miaya are here as a vessel. And so we are only really giving a very small snapshot of so much information. There are individuals across the world, here in the United States and everywhere else, that spend their times, have higher degrees, learning degrees in this topic of racism. And so I just want you, and granted, that's not we are, healthcare professionals that are coming to bring this information. We will have at the end of this resources that will help kind of, get you this. I want this webinar to be like a Kickstarter, in your mind of, okay, what are the next steps that I can take? And so just be mindful of that we will be giving a lot of snippets of information per se. So the first slide will be on non-racist versus anti-racist. The next will be how racism shows up in everyday life, recognizing privilege, open conversations with family, friends, peers, and why they matter, action steps, resources, questions and answers, and then of course, references. So we'll go to the first slide. In the first slide, we'll be focusing on making a distinction between what it is to be non-racist versus what it means to be anti-racist. And the reason that this is important is because the vast majority of us will consider ourselves, well, I'm not racist. And I'm certain that majority of you on this webinar have either uttered those words or heard someone else say that to you. But the definition, as you see here, which says is that, non-racist is defined as an individual who does not engage in overt or open racism, such as, saying slurs, participating or, making jokes, etc. But the same person also does not call out others when they see racist behavior being exhibited. And so, I give the example of, at dinner, lunch with friends, amongst friends, and a comment is made that seems, off-putting to any race, right? Granted, we are two Black women here, and really the biggest movement right now is the Black Lives Matter movement, but this is going to be applicable really to any group that has been discriminated against. And so the difference between the non-racist and the anti-racist is in that setting when you are at a lunch or dinner with friends, that anti-racist is going to call that person out for making that comment. And so that's really the biggest distinction that needs to be made and understood, because in the event that you are sitting in that table and you don't say anything when you heard something that is overtly racist, then you are really a non-racist and not an anti-racist. And the goal is that we get to a point of being anti-racist, because that is what eventually allyship will look like. I didn't mention this, and it will come up at the very end, that Miaya and I did complete a anti-racism module that is that's created by the Diversity and Resiliency Department in El Paso, and it's a three module anti-racism training that, you know, each model is about 2 hours, and it really goes to, so the vast majority of the information you'll see in this presentation comes from that training. And I highly recommend that everyone, you know, and you can start and stop it at any time, but I do recommend that, you know, you take some time to do that module, because it doesn't only focus on, you know, just what's going on now, which is, you know, police brutality, Black Lives Matter movement, but it really takes you through history, and it talks about how, you know, the natives and the indigenous people were, you know, discriminated against, you know, the Mexicans when they, you know, the land was taken. I mean, it goes through so much, and there was so much that I learned from that, and so I would highly recommend as well, just before I forget to say that. Maya, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to this slide.
I would say it being anti-racist is part of creating yourself as an ally. And in order to do that, you have to stand up against subjugation of oppression of all marginalized groups. Like you said, it's not just Black people, it's all marginalized people that we feel are being oppressed by either systems in place or just outright racism. So an ally can no longer sit idly by and without questioning or creating tension against the status quo. And for me to be an ally, it's people of privilege have to have difficult, hopefully educating conversations with other people of privilege in order for us to continue to grow. Anything?
Absolutely.
Yes. You're good?
Okay.
All right, next slide.
Yes. So as we now kind of know that definition and the distinction between the two, we want to now shed light on, you know, how racism shows up in everyday life. Because again, I think also this is another tough thing to reconcile, because some of it, quite frankly, majority of it is not, you know, overt and just out there in the open. A lot of this are things that have been built into the system. So first, we'll talk about the Jim Crow laws, and then we'll go into institutional racism. But what I do want to say is that after you understand the Jim Crow laws, you will understand, you'll further understand institutional racism. So they kind of go hand in hand. So the examples we'll give, you'll notice, kind of explain institutional racism and what that looks like today. So the Jim Crow laws, as the definition here states, were laws and social rules enforcing racial segregation in the southern United States that mandated racial segregation in all public facilities in states of former Confederate states of America. This started around 1890s with the separate but equal status for African Americans, and continued until 1965. And 1965 being the year that Lyndon B. Johnson signed this, the Civil Rights Act ending the Jim Crow laws. However, as I stated, so this is kind of the time that we've all known as the separate but equal time. So this is where, when you look at, you know, history and in books, you see the, you know, whites only, you know, water fountains, restaurant counters, where, you know, banks were, or even just institutions where Black people just were not allowed to go into, just strictly based on the color of their skin. And so in that time, and Maya will also kind of talk about, before it ended, well, after it ended, rather, the Great Migration, but you can imagine just living in that time. So yes, slavery ended, but then there were these laws that were essentially signed, and it's like, okay, yeah, slavery is ended. And whenever I think of these things, I think of just what does ended mean, right? Ended, you know, legally from that perspective, but then things systemically can still be placed to have something continue and may just look different. And so there will then come, from the ending of the Jim Crow era, would come the Great Migration. Maya will talk about this.
So because of implementation of Jim Crow, right, after slavery, over, I think they said approximately 6 million African Americans left the South, and it kind of went in waves. The first wave is approximately started around 1910 to 1915 and ended around 1940. And initially, the first wave, more Black Americans went more north or Midwest, so like New York or Chicago, in that area. Then the second wave, the time ranging 1940 to 1970, and that's when Black Americans moved out more west. Once again, this was to escape separate but equal in Jim Crow laws and under the myth, really, that they could have equality in other places of the United States, when reality, racism was embedded in all parts. But because of Jim Crow, there was kind of like this mass exodus of Black Americans trying to free the different form of slavery.
Right. And so when we move to now the definition of institutional racism, this is why, you know, kind of being aware of what was happening in that time will then explain what now happens with institutional racism. And so the definition, again, from the Resiliency Institute, is a pattern of social institutions, so governmental organizations, schools, banks, courts of law, giving negative treatment to a group of people based on their race, having a disproportionately negative effect on racial minorities, access to quality goods, services, and opportunities. And so what then happened after that Civil Rights Act was signed by Lyndon B. Johnson, and then even the Voting Rights Act then the following year, is you still started to see things that ended up being put in place that would continue to show up, you know, up to this point in time. I'll give an example of, we'll come back to a book when we talk a lot more about, you know, the new Jim Crow. And I'm certain that a lot of you have probably heard of this book, which was written by Michelle Alexander. Another book, if you're looking for a book to read, to understand that, you know, this is what the Jim Crow era was. When it ended, she essentially takes time to explain the things that have been placed in the system that now still have you, have remnants of slavery, but not overt slavery. It's built and embedded in the system. And it makes it difficult to recognize, because these things in the system are so surface and neutral that it's difficult to say, well, but how do we really know that's because of race? One thing that came from, so an example of institutional racism. And so if you think about back, in that time, this is also within this time frame was World War II. And so when World War II ended in 1944, you know, America realized that, okay, we're going to have all these, you know, military veterans come back to the States. And so what are we going to do essentially to help and make certain that they're stable from a financial perspective, from a health perspective? And so one of the things that came was within this time was the GI Bill. And so the GI Bill, and granted, you know, still keep in mind that the Jim Crow law does not end until 1965, but you will see how even after it ends in 1965, a bill that was created then still persists beyond that time. So in 1944, the government decided, well, let's create this GI Bill that's going to help, you know, veterans with health care, help them get stipends to cover tuition, lower interest rate mortgages, and unemployment benefits. But what ended up happening is John Rankin was a congressman that, you know, advocated intensely that this bill not be stated at a federal level, where then you had to do or every state had to imply or carry out the law the way it was written by the federal government. He advocated that the states, you know, this is going to be this bill, this is what we'll offer to the veterans, but we'll allow the states, you know, carry out this bill. Well, then what ended up happening is when all the veterans came back, you ended up having, you know, it's quoted as, you know, 1.2 million plus Black veterans who just didn't benefit at all from those low interest rate mortgages, from, you know, unemployment benefits, all of these things. There's a statistic that talked about, so for example, in just the state of Mississippi, in 1947, this is, again, remember, this bill was, you know, signed into law in 1944, the GI Bill, where over 3,200 plus veterans received funding in the state of Mississippi, you know, throughout 13 cities. And of those 3,200 that were given to veterans, only 2 were Black borrowers. Well, again, you can recognize that, you know, there's not, you can't say that, you know, of all the veterans that came from Mississippi, that, you know, only 2 were Black. And so that's just kind of an example of, you know, what institutional racism may look like. And this has gone on, and it carries on even to wealth. How, you know, people from that time, where if you're given an low interest rate mortgage, you're able to afford and buy this home, well, that person passes away, you pass it on to your kid, and then that kid passes it on to that kid. That's wealth that's being built over time. So they did a study that looked at what has happened since that GI Bill was passed. And so, you know, the years later, so in 1984, there was this kind of a study done to retroact and see like, okay, what has happened? And what they noticed was that the median net worth of a family, if you were just to look at it from that perspective of just, you know, what can happen, and that was just Mississippi. I'm only giving you a stat from Mississippi, not the rest of the states, that the wealth gap was for every white family at that time in 1984, they were worth 100,000 and a Black family was 12,000. And we can't, again, when you hear this idea of, well, you know, we just want, you know, people just need to pick themselves up by the bootstraps, you know, just work harder. I come from a working class family, white collar, you know, all of the sayings that we hear within that. What we're trying to illuminate is, but you must understand that there were things that blocked that Black family, you know, or brown family from getting access to, you know, some service that perhaps could have benefited their generation of families to come. Maya.
Yes, completely agree. Like you said, how can we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps when we're not given boots? I think this too lends itself to, I think that's part of the Great Migration, trying to move and live in places where possibly they could get loans for housing, but then there's things like redlining, where banks still didn't approve for Black Americans to still own property. Once again, to limit wealth amongst the Black community. So we're kind of constantly put in a position where even when we try to build wealth and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, they're taking out from under us, and you got to kind of figure it out and start all over again.
Yes, for sure. So those are just, you know, again, two examples of probably a huge, plethora of examples that we could give, but again, we're limited in time. And so when you go in and further delve into, and even like we talked about the resiliency training we completed, it goes into so many of these things as well. And when you see that, you will understand, you know, or it sheds light on just a part of history that perhaps may not always be fully illuminated in like the school setting, so to speak. And then microaggressions, I'll let, you know, Maya start off with that.
So microaggressions. I came across this word recently, and I feel like it completely explains things that I've felt and experienced growing up, especially as an adult. And a microaggression is defined as a statement, action, or incident regarding as an instance of indirect, subtle, or unintentional discrimination against members of a marginalized group, such as a racial or ethnic minority. And so it's things when Black people are told, oh, you're so well-spoken or well put together, as if you wouldn't expect me to be a college graduate and well-spoken. And this brings up the idea of bias. I think hopefully people are embrace that we all have biases, but how our biases could negatively influence how we interact with people or our concept of people. And to recognize that and hopefully be willing to confront it head on and really ask us the question as to why do I feel this way, or why do I think this way? Because although it can be harmless in its intent, not outright racist, but because of societal norms and expectations to the marginalized groups, it only further insinuates that the oppression, essentially. Like, you wouldn't expect anything different from us. When all humans are different, all Black Americans aren't monolithic, just like all white people aren't monolithic. Like, we're all are individuals, and to treat us as such. But then all groups of people essentially should be treated as well. So to work on microaggressions, we all have to be honest about our biases in order for improvements. Okay. Which leads us to recognizing privilege. But I think microaggressions is partly because of privilege. So white privilege is defined as the level of societal advantage that comes with being seen as the norm. just a virtue of being a white person of any kind. You're a part of a dominant group, which tends to be respected, assumed the best of, and given the benefit of the doubt. Which then we also can also read implicit bias. The attitudes or stereotypes that impact understanding actions of an unconscious manner. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an intentional awareness or intentional control. I would say white privilege is real. And when I talk to other white people, they acknowledge it. And it's this, to be a white person in America, there's just a different way that life works for you. And as a minority group, we have to be cognizant that that's not the same for us. And it's not that anyone wants a handout or wants to be given special treatment, but we need to acknowledge that we're not on the same playing field. Like you want it to be equitable, and the reality is, based on privilege, that it's not. Implicit bias is, in my opinion, like preparing for this and just learning and investigating more about implicit bias. It can be, I don't know if confusing is the right word, because I try and listen to all viewpoints regarding this issue. And I feel like opposing viewpoints have brought up implicit bias could even be unconscious bias. So how can you even address something when you're unconsciously doing it, right? At least as an adult person. But what has happened is that you've been taught this over time. So now it's a part of your unconscious bias. So it really does take time. And I'm sure Sean could speak more to this, really regarding like mental health. And you may be questioning more about like, why is it that I think this way? Or why do I feel the way that I do regarding some issues or people? And in order to address that, I think it'll take time and work and effort in order for us to continue to grow and move forward. You have anything to add, Emem or Sean?
Go ahead.
Yes, I mean, I think you said everything that I wanted to say. I do know in the training what they did, one of the videos, they said, you know, okay, think of the images that come up in your mind when I say the following statements. A smart and successful person, a good student, a criminal, a lazy person, an intelligent person. And so their thought being that whatever image you got of a person, and again, which Miaya said, unconscious bias can be good or positive or negative. But really, then there starts to be this point where we do equate what does a criminal look like? You know, a criminal is not perhaps, you know, a person in a suit and a tie with a briefcase, but maybe perhaps just this, you know, teenager. I mean, we'll give the case of Trayvon Martin, a kid walking with a hoodie to get Skittles, you know, or whatever candy he was trying to get. And so that's this idea, but oh, he looked threatening. Whereas, but isn't the same person with that suit and tie going to Wall Street who caused, you know, or was part of an economic, you know, crash, isn't that person a criminal? Because certainly there was a loss there. And so I thought, I never thought of it that way. But those are things, again, are unconscious thoughts that we have. We all have them. I have them. And it's really just this consistent, especially because I work and I've served in my entire career a group that has, you know, I predominantly have seen an underserved group. And so there's always, I'm constantly making certain that what I say, how I treat patients, you know, my care plan for patients is really not coming from a space of bias, what I think they need to do. That's what I would add. Sean?
Yeah, I want to just add the part about, given all of the studies that came, I don't remember the university that has published all of the implicit bias questionnaires that you can take online, is that time. If given time, our brains can recognize, oh, this is my first knee-jerk reaction. This is my first response, but maybe it's not my best response. And so if I give myself that extra second or two to pause, I'm going to be better off being able to call to my own attention that I have implicit bias, and how do I want to, given that background, how do I want to act in this situation? Because my lenses are not clear, right? They are clouded by my biases. And so the best I can do is take some time to allow for that to be factored into the decision I make and the action I take.
Thank you, Sean.
Yes. And one of our panelists said it's Harvard, and it was in the training that we did, the Diversity and Resilient Institute of El Paso, the link for the bias, it was from Harvard, the study you're talking about, Sean.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right. So, which leads us to open conversation with friends and families and why they matter. White privilege, I would think, is an uncomfortable conversations with white Americans because there can be familial to some difficult topics and conversations that can be, I hopefully, reevaluated. Knowing the biases that you may bring to the table. So right now it seems as though the Confederate flag and Confederate statues are a hot topic now. And the reality is they've meant the same thing that they have when they were erected after the Civil War, on top of that. But people have used their heritage to defend these racist groups of people, which we know essentially what they represent. But if a person has positive attitudes towards their experiences with regard to that Confederate soldier name of their high school, or whatever else positive experiences that they have, it's difficult for them to accept the fact that this is a racially symbol that does not represent all of America. And it didn't from the beginning. It wanted to separate from America. So being able to have ovations with your friends and family and loved ones, with people of privilege, continuing to have these conversations with people of privilege, I would think would be uncomfortable. But like Dr. King said, tension is, we don't shy away from it. It's necessary for growth, if you want to grow. And then you have to ask, really, why is this worth my time? And my why for the growth. Being ready to be called out and willing to change is cool. We know as adults, change is hard. Even as children know that change is hard. This pandemic clearly has been difficult. Change is hard, but if you're honest in your pursuit and want things to change for others, for the betterment of humanity, then you got to do it. Example for me would be trying to lose weight. Changing my diet is difficult, but if I really want to do it, it needs to be done in order for me to see the progress that I want to see. This is constant work that is challenging and can be led to substantial change. So just like anything else, we understand anything that's worth doing, worth having is worth doing, right? If we really say we want to build this America that Dr. King talks about in order to achieve not necessarily color blindness, but color acceptance and cultural acceptance, then we have to do the work in order to help each other. It's not Black Americans can't just be by themselves. Like collectively, we have to work together as a whole against all society oppressive nature. Like it's not individualized, because what happens to one group will eventually spill over to another. We're not separate. We're all here together and have to work together. So let's go to action steps. Oh, we're just reinforcing being an ally. We kind of touched on this earlier when we were distinguishing between a non-racist and an anti-racist. For me, an anti-racist is an ally, and that's a hard job, in my opinion. To be an anti-racist and an ally, it's hopeful to now. I feel like people, and maybe because of the pandemic, were able to like stop and look with the murder of George Floyd, like no one could really, you didn't hear any excuses like you had in the past with police brutality. And I think we're in a position now where everyone, pandemic, we're at home and we're able to process, hey, these people are talking about something. And reality is, unfortunately, history has shown it. The past riots that have happened in this country were generally due to police brutality. And this is another example of that. The difference though may be seen, we're all in the same position and it seems as though we're coming together in order to fight a common cause, which I hope, which in the end, when we work together, it's for the betterment of Americans. So to become an ally, once again, you just got to do the work and stand up. And no long, in my opinion, is there a middle ground. Like before, you could be a non-racist and it'd be okay, right? Like you can hear and essentially partake in racist conversations and not say anything. But if you're an ally and an anti-racist, it's not acceptable anymore. Like you have to, we need your help. We can't do it by ourselves, and we have to hold people accountable. And that's even within all communities, Black and brown. We all have to help all, in my opinion, all marginalized groups. We can't just help one and not the other. I very much believe in Black Lives Matter, but that doesn't mean that we negate everybody. The idea is this needs to be addressed, but overall, all marginalized groups, hopefully when you're an ally, can all work together. And from here, these are, oh, sorry.
I don't have anything to add. I think you said everything I would probably say.
And so here is the resources. I'll let you explain the resources in that.
Yes, and so the resources, as you see, 2 resources I've listed. The first I've already mentioned multiple times. The website is listed there, Diversity and Resiliency Institute of El Paso. Anti-racism training, like I said, myself and Maya did complete it. It is 3 modules. You can start and stop whenever you want to. Each model is about 2 hours or so it's 6 hours in total. And it's interactive as well, so that's kind of nice. You can, meaning not someone else is not on the other end, but you can go into forums and chat rooms. So I think it's very beneficial because, again, it doesn't only, it gives you a wonderful history of just all marginalized groups in the United States since, the inception. So I like that training. And the second, of course, is New Beginnings Center, which is Sean's center. And what I really do, the reason I listed, I didn't list any more information is because I believe that, Sean, the email you sent out, it was around June 10th to your subscribers, was so detailed. There was so much information. There was a Google Docs created on there that essentially has almost anything you can think of, because people have questions like, well, what do I, what books do I read? What movies do I watch? How do I talk about this with my kids? Are there organizations I can support? So I'll let Sean actually speak on that.
Thank you both. Thank you, Maya and Emem. Yes, so we'll send the links to all that out again in the thank you for attending. We hope to continue to add to that. So we welcome this being a community, and there are, lots and lots of resources. We only can kind of put out what we know and share it with others. So it'll be a work in progress. And with that, I want to really support the questions that folks submitted. Emem and Maya, are there?
Yes, and so,
Okay.
these are just the reference, and so I'll get to the questions. So you had the opportunities to submit questions before, some of you did, and so we'll just go right through these. First question was, I'm too scared of COVID to do any protesting. I have no extra money to donate. What else can I do to help right now? What are the best books to read regarding racism? Why is cultural appropriation bad? And so, and a lot of this I know we've kind of already covered, but I will just give, again, outside of the Google's doc that you will likely receive from New Beginnings, there are 3 organizations that we will highlight that we also have supported and follow. So the Color of Change is an organization. You can just Google them and they'll come up. That essentially is currently, these are organizations currently doing work to fight racial injustices throughout the country. Poor People's Campaign is another one, so you can follow them, subscribe. Until Freedom is another campaign. And I bring all of these up because when you go to each website, you will see, each one has, there's something they're focusing on. So one may be, today's focus is just on, you know, Breonna Taylor and, you know, but there's something different every day and you can join in that focus. As far as not having money to donate, that's not a problem at all. Because again, being an ally, presents in different ways. And so you just being home calling, you know, a lot of times, for instance, getting, you know, Breonna Taylor still till this day, the police that, officers that killed her have not been arrested. And so they do have call to actions where they ask you to call the offices. They have call to actions where they ask you to email, because again, they collect all of this information and this helps, you know, make an arrest. And so you can still be an ally without having necessarily to donate money. The books part, again, there'll be so many books on that list that I'm not really going to go through them. Granted, I did give the New Jim Crow in this presentation. And then cultural appropriation, why is it bad? Maya, do you want to answer this?
Why is cultural appropriation? Is that the question?
That was part of that question.
Which is, why is it bad?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, I would, my
let's talk about what it is
for the past couple days is what it is. Yeah. Why? Cultural appropriation, in my opinion, I don't have the definition, but essentially I see it as in when you you kind of use a culture as a token when it's to your benefit. It's not necessarily that you've educated yourself about it or that you actually appreciate it. It's that it's cool and trendy with the time. So I would ask your why. It seems that hair is a hot topic, and non-Black people may have braids now or cornrows. Well, there was a time when that considered appropriate for us to have in a professional setting. So now it seems as though, oh, this is an acceptable hairstyle without acknowledging where it's from or that it's appropriate, then maybe that we were wrong and misstepped. Even now, for example, hair is still a hot topic that Black Americans are still trying to put through legislation in order for us to just have our natural hair. That doesn't seem appropriate. So when you essentially use our culture for your benefit, I believe that to be cultural appropriation, and it's not cool.
Yes, I agree. I think
and you know, to me, it sort of lends itself to, which we'll be talking more next week as well, of this ouch, oops, you know, that there are things, as you talked about before, that let's say as a white person, I don't realize that I'm culturally appropriating something. But when I do realize it, as when I know better, I'm expected to do better. There's someone's gonna have to tell me, ouch, hey, that's not cool, that's cultural appropriation, or that, you know, you're not really paying attention to what you're doing. And then I get a chance to say, oops, and then I get a chance to do better.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay.
And with that, I do feel like, I hope during this time, if people are willing to change, that the person on the other end also extends grace, right? Because we're all going to make mistakes, and we all, but be ready for the ouch, like know that in order for change, it's going to be uncomfortable. But hopefully too, that grace is extended in order for that mistake to be corrected and move on. All right, you have the next question, Emem?
Yes, the next question, easy one. Will the slides be and the recording be available? That answer is yes. Next question was, will the webinar highlight the struggles of Black, queer, and trans experience within the Black community and outside the Black community? Of course, you know, again, I think Maya alluded to this, the idea that, you know, although Black lives matter, we look at that as an umbrella, you know, and in order to understand, you know, one marginalized group's problem will definitely spill over everywhere else. Just in June of this year, 2024, Black trans women were killed across the nation: Dallas, Little Rock, Arkansas, Ohio, Philadelphia. I think that, you know, Black trans women face, you know, transphobia, racism, and misogyny. It's just this big melting pot of those three things. And so it's almost just this extra, you know, step to really not making that life matter even more. And so for sure, it is something, I think that honestly is a topic on its own that needs to, you know, that's a webinar in itself and a series, yes, might I say. But we want to recognize that, again, it's really all lives. when we talk about Black lives. So as a person that says, if I tell you I'm a Black, you know, Black lives matter. Although we're focusing today and right now in this moment and movement on Black lives, it's not that I'm not also going to talk about when I have a patient that's a trans Black patient, that I'm not going to address with her concerns, you know, the things that, you know, matter to her right now, the fears. I will still address those things, even though, yes, she is a Black woman, but there's also that aspect of, like I said, the transphobia.
Yes, I agree. I have a Dr. King quote to help with this. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. So completely what Emem is saying. To me, an example of that is the crack cocaine era for the Black community. It hit us hard and destroyed a lot of families, and we really just got thrown in jail. And then later down the line, we have this opioid addiction within the white community. And now, you know, it's a mental health issue, and we need, which is true, very much. I completely feel like addiction is a health issue, but Black Americans weren't extended that same grace. But the reality is, because there was an injustice there, you think the injustice is, no, it carries over. So we have to, once again, Black people aren't monolithic, just like white people aren't monolithic. Unfortunately, there's a lot of homophobia in the Black community. There's lots of things we need to work on. Black on Black violence will be another one. Really, it's just steps there. Like there's multiple issues, just like there is in every society. I just don't like the argument that, especially with Black Lives Matter, or why do Black people get upset with police brutality? The reality is police brutality affects all of us. And if you have on this idea of it affects Black people, it'll eventually affect you as well. And I think we are seeing that of people of all races, that police brutality is an issue for everyone. And it needs to be addressed, and it just extends itself into other issues. So once again, the theme of us working collectively, when it helps one group, generally it's probably going to help you too.
And I will say also here, words matter. And I say that because we do have this, you know, tendency to, that's a criticism that is always thrown out. Well, you know, but how come, you know, you Black people are not taking care of the Black on Black violence? But you must understand that violence happens in proximity. And so there's white on white violence, there's Asian on Asian violence. You know, if you live in a community that's predominantly of your ethnicity, it is only likely that you will see that happen. So when I say words matter, I mean that just as much as the media uses Black on Black crime to publicize, and we recognize, yes, our people are being killed, but I would hope that you recognize that that's used as publicity as well, because we never hear, I don't think in my entire life I've ever heard white on white violence used as a phrase on any news broadcasting system. And I have been alive for very many years. So I just want us to understand.
It's under the umbrella of domestic violence.
Yes.
It's a nicer.
There you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question. Oh, go
Well,
ahead.
I want to just pivot for a second, because I want to, this question seems related. Do you believe you can work in a police station and be an ally?
Completely. We need,
No kidding.
we need those people. Yeah. You know, yes, I feel like we all know, I'm sure, I'm speaking for you panelists, that all cops are not bad cops. That's not, you know, and unfortunately I feel like that's what's getting lost. I think people of all communities have had relatives that work for police or firemen. No, all people in law enforcement aren't bad. The problem is when there are bad people, no one says anything, and you just take that as part of the job, which that's not okay, and that's interesting, right? To me, then you have to question yourself and your own human existence and what that means to you. I like to listen to Candace Owens just for fun, and she brought up that the people in Minnesota, it was their first day on the job. But if you see someone's neck, knee on someone's neck, I don't care if that's your first day. Wouldn't you be like, hey, this isn't okay? So this idea that right, they're still human. And I think that then yes, I need people in the police station to recognize other marginalized people as human. And unfortunately, that's where we are. Like Black people have constantly had to fight that I'm human, like since the inception of the United States, right? Like we were 3/5 of a person. Like still today, I'm just fighting. I just want to be human. So yes, I need people who are allies in police stations to say that these people are human and to be treated as such.
Mm-hmm. And not be complicit. I'm glad you brought up the George Floyd murder, because that's exactly what I thought about. You know, you had, you know, this man's knee on a neck, and you had 3 complicit police officers, or 2 or 3, however many. The
Right.
point is, you still stood there and watched someone for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, you know, take a life. And to me, that really just tells me that nobody in that, you know, space of power saw themselves in George Floyd.
Right. Right.
So what do you want me? And I think, quite honestly, that is what is invoking these protests, is that you didn't even consider that person a human. Okay, maybe not you on the neck, because clearly you have an issue, but then what about the others? So yes, we do believe that, but it's going to take that calling out, right? That anti-racist behavior of calling out, you know, and you could remove anti-racist, but just human. Like the fact that I'm going to call out, you know, when I see something that egregious happen, I'm going to call it out.
Right.
Next question. Question about race and racism on my campus, a project that is open-ended, dealing with a goal of normalizing race discussions on campus. I had said, and you know, Maya will probably add, I just thought, well, I think you should probably start with, you know, outside of this talk and then the numerous information you will get emailed, is start with your Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, because every campus has to have one. And within that office, they also have a list of all organizations that are considered, you know, your minority group organizations on campus. And I would probably either reach out to, you know, the president, the secretary, whomever is on their board, reach out to them, know when, I mean, we're in the virtual meeting world now, know when they're holding meetings, ask them what are the issues that they are handling, because every group is going to have something different they're handling. And to me, that gives kind of like a nice starting point for you to see what is going on specifically on your campus. Maya, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I agree.
Okay.
I feel like we're blessed to live in the society, and I could be biased too. I'm in Houston, people. I don't know if people are in California. Hello, Texas people. Houston is a extremely diverse place. Emem and I were blessed to grow up in one of the most diverse counties in the country, believe it or not. But don't get me wrong, racism is alive and well in Texas. Emem and I can share stories. But with that said, that question, I don't know. I'm biased. I've always grown up around a culturally diverse group of people, and actually, when I go places that aren't, it's uncomfortable. My family is originally from St. Louis, Missouri, and for me, it's extremely segregated. When I go to St. Louis, I'm with my Black family, and that's all I see. And not unless, you know, we go out and about and around town. And so on college campus, I kind of expect the same. But once again, I went to U of H, where at that time, I think we were 2nd or 3rd, right? With like most diverse university in the country. So unfortunately, I don't know any different. Like, I don't know a monolithic type of society. So that question for me is hang around different people. I don't keep working at it.
Okay.
Was the next question about education, or?
No, the next question was the t-shirt. Someone looking for a platform, interested in launching t-shirts, looking for a platform. And so I wanted to challenge whomever sent this question to, I'm all about, you know, business and, you know, that whole idea, entrepreneurship. But what I would do is, first I would create these shirts. I would sell them to close family and friends, because, you know, obviously they would be the first supporters. And then what I would say is, once you galvanize that movement within, you know, the trusted people, you know, then I would contact a nonprofit. And now we're going to give you a list of people that are doing work in racial injustice. And so, you know, partner with them, and it can be locally, and say, listen, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to donate part of my proceeds to your organization, and then come back to a platform such as the New Beginnings and say, okay, here's what I've done. I've sold this to people. I've partnered with this organization. Would you be willing to promote my t-shirt business? That's how I would do that.
Nice. All right, we're going to need to take the last 1 or 2 questions to just honor people's time.
Okay.
Okay. I saw one on, sorry, cut you off, Emem. The diversity training we did, it was free when we did it, but now I think it might be $30 to $50. It was, in my opinion, reasonable and worth your time if someone wanted to do that. I also wanted to comment on, we got a question about education. Emem, do you have it? You can read it off, or
What to
I
do
don't
as
have
a,
like the
a
exact.
white teacher for my black
Yes.
students?
Oh, yes.
Yes, I think that was a very good question. So hopefully this talk encourage them to continue to learn about the culture and be willing to embrace their biases and really think as to why. Unfortunately, once again, Black students are penalized more, have more discipline statistics than other groups. And we know that Black kids are seen for whatever reason to be older and have different expectations. So if you're a teacher, you, in my opinion, should be mindful of your own biases, right? And continue to learn and grow. But also have the same expectations for your minority students that you would for your non-Black students, right? The same level of expectations. With regards to dealing with the parents, if I'm going to speak collectively, pretty straightforward. We don't like for you to like go around here, like be direct in your responses or your expectations or the needs that you need with the student. We'll also, go ahead.
Well, I think to me, part of this conversation is, as a white teacher, I actually think it's important to really acknowledge, gosh, as a Black family in this community, whether it's in Oak Park here and in one of our wealthier communities, or whether it's in Oxnard or wherever, but rather than like, I see no color, to see and honor, hey, I'm going to pay attention that you probably have some unique challenges and some unique strengths. Please share with me. I'm willing to learn and help assist you as your child's teacher.
Yes. And I feel what's happened sometimes too is, I don't know if you're familiar with the term, the white savior. And it's portrayed in movies that the white person came in and saved, and you don't have to do that, right? Right. You have the same, there is idea within our community, we work hard and you have the same expectations. Now the resources that we might not have the same resources available to us in order to achieve that. So if you were to provide the stool to help us to stand up in order to meet it, may be necessary. And hope, if you're a teacher, I would hope that you would know the needs of your students or your classroom. But yes, to be cognizant of right, that dialogue and right, culturally different. It's not that we don't see color, it's just we're culturally different. And I think it's the thing, African Americans, we're taught how to move in white society, and you should say this and don't do this and you act this way, but it's not the other way around. So to be cognizant of that. And also another point would be restorative justice. I think that it's been kind of talked about, that's the new term now, and even within the educational system, might be something for teachers or administration to investigate more in order to address their minority stars to discipline.
Great.
Okay.
All right. Let's breathe. I want to honor our time for this week.
Wow.
Come back next week. There's a lot, and it's the beginning of a conversation, and I hope more. Surge, Ventura County, Stand Up for Racial Justice, another organization that you could get involved with. We'll be here to kind of continue the conversation and talk a little bit more in depth about white fragility and this white supremacy culture that we are steeped in, that we may not even see as such. And again, to kind of get out of this, we just have to deal with the bad people. That's maybe my angle, is that we're in this ongoing drama triangle that we can't yet escape, but recognizing that that's where we're at, that this cycle of violence and perpetration, that we're all in it. And so rather than trying to figure out who the bad people are and deal with them, we got to figure out who we all are and deal with us. So I hope you'll come back next week. All the information, again, more details on our website and in our email newsletter. Please sign up on our website. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Maya. Thank you, Emem.
Thank you.
Blessed
Thank you.
what you've offered to all of
Thank
us. And we'll take a picture of the questions we didn't get answered and the chats, and we'll try to weave those into next week's talk as well. All right, until then, be safe, take care, everyone, and hope to see you all next week. Bye now.
Thank you.